NFL talk and fantasy football. Coming to you live from the BackupPunter.com. This is the Backup Punter Podcast. Now, here's your host, the man who thinks fullbacks win championships, Keegan Matheson.
What's up? Welcome back to the podcast. This is Keegan Matheson here with you, the Backup Punter Podcast, episode number 30. We've made it to 30, and this episode is in honor of the greatest man to ever wear the number 30, the greatest football player to wear the green and gold in the state of Wisconsin, fullback John Kuhn. Not fantasy relevant, but championship relevant. Always. And as always, this podcast is brought to you by the good people at DynastySportsEmpire.com Fantasy Sports. So whether you're into NFL, like we're about to talk about, NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball, Dynasty Sports Empire has got you covered. So fantasy leagues, contents, rankings, projections, more. Everything you're going to need. Check them online at DynastySportsEmpire.com. That is DynastySportsEmpire.com. So we're going to dive into Week 7 this week. What happened? It was not a good week for a lot of people, especially if you are someone who owns Arian Foster. Gone for the year with an Achilles injury. And let's talk about that right off the top. That was perhaps the worst game of football of the season. And this has been a season absolutely filled with dumpster football. Terrible football. Every week there are a few games where you just wonder what's going on. And we sent one of those over to London this week. The Buffalo Bills and Jacksonville Jaguars stunk the place up, which is too bad because we continue to give London this kind of sea-level type of football, but hey, they eat it up, and it was entertaining at least in kind of a bad action movie sort of way, and it did great. The Yahoo live stream, I think it peaked over 33 million viewers, so that's going to be some big leverage down the road when the NFL and big networks go back to the table. I think that's 2022 when that landscape changes. But getting back to the Houston Texans, who got absolutely throat punched. I think throat punched is a good representation of what went on there. Now, you all saw the game. You all saw the highlights. It was as bad as it could be. We don't need to get into the gritty details. What's important here for fantasy football purposes is losing Arian Foster. And this one is tough because Arian Foster has been a good soldier throughout most of his career. He's a player that interests me. I think he's an intelligent person and a person that interests me outside of football, which is very, very rare. We'll talk about that a bit more in a little bit with Greg Hardy and just the great display of brain power he put on again this weekend. It's a tradition, I guess, with him. But with Arian Foster, you almost have to wonder if this is it for him and the Houston Texans. He is going to be an expensive running back, an old running back, and a running back coming off an Achilles injury. A running back that never really relied on great speed to begin with. So what shape would he come back in? And would he fit into the Houston Texans next year? I don't know. This is going to be an offseason of great change for the Texans. Everything I read seems to indicate that Bill O'Brien is there to stay. He's owed a lot of money, and generally speaking, it doesn't seem like he's the problem. This isn't a Miami Dolphins situation. Although we've seen that, like the Dolphins did, maybe a coaching change can shake up a roster. The issue, though, with the Houston Texans, there's a reason nobody talked about them in the preseason like teams talked about Miami. Miami was supposed to be the breakout team. All of this talent, Ndamukong Suh in there, Ryan Tannehill breakout. None of that followed the Houston Texans. There's nothing to be excited about with the Houston Texans outside of J.J. Watt, obviously, who is getting double-teamed and triple-teamed and washed out of games entirely. It's kind of difficult to watch. He's not able to impact anything because there's nothing going on around him. Vince Wilfork, not creating much at all. Jadeveon Clowney, incredible athlete, but he needs to put it together as a football player. I'm sick of athletes, of fast people. It's difficult for a lot of these super athletes to put it together and do football player things, which is dumbing it down, I know, but Jadeveon Clowney hasn't done that yet. They're also wasting DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins is one of the best receivers in this league. I'll admit that I wasn't sure on him entering the year, but they've matched him up with Ryan Mallett, who missed his flight. they matched him up with Brian Hoyer. I mean, what are you going to do? It's tough for DeAndre Hopkins because he's having the early stages of his prime wasted. So in my opinion, they are going to use the rest of this year to see if they have anything in Alfred Blue. Now, he's been used the last couple of years because Arian Foster is injury-prone. He's been used sparingly in his second year now, and there is talent there. It's not dynamic, but Arian Foster isn't a super athlete himself. He's just very intelligent, decisive, and well-rounded. So Alfred Blue is the running back that I'm going to look to own in Houston. And there's going to be some names behind him there. You might look at a Chris Polk. I don't think he's going to do enough at all, though, because you've got to expect the Houston Texans to be losing a lot of these games down the stretch. It's the unfortunate reality. They are going to be trailing by a lot. They will probably have to abandon the run a little bit. So in terms of fantasy football purposes, I would roster Alfred Blue. I wouldn't rush out to start him until we see a little something, but for now, jump on Blue. But it's tough, Arian Foster, because this is a season killer for a lot of teams. If you're an owner that drafted Arian Foster, you have probably been waiting for him. You have worked your season around getting him back. All of your decisions up until now have been, well, if I can get by in running back 2, and then Arian Foster will come back. My RB1 will bump down to RB2. I'll have my star. I'll be fine. I drafted Arian Foster in one of my 3 primary leagues, the leagues I'm very dedicated to, probably over-obsessed with. But I drafted him in one of those leagues, and 2 weeks ago, I traded him for Julio Jones, a 1-for-1 deal, and one that worked for both of our teams. I needed a receiver. They needed a running back. And when I saw the injury, I can't even tell you how badly I felt. I felt slimy about it. I didn't feel good about that. But it is the cruel, cruel mistress, the never good for nothing fantasy football that we're addicted to, but I don't know if we really love it, do we? It's more of an addiction. So I mentioned Greg Hardy a little earlier. We'll touch on him before we get into the X's and O's, what we're going to talk about today. 3 up, 3 down we have coming for you. The Blue Jays are out of the playoffs, but we're going to keep 3 up, 3 down, just to keep a stock watch on the teams that are going in the right direction or the teams that are the Houston Texans. But with Greg Hardy, first of all, you've all seen it by now, the video of him on the field getting into a bit of a physical altercation with a special teams coach, with Des Bryant, with teammates. And if you've ever listened to this podcast before, you know that I think Greg Hardy is an idiot. He doesn't deserve to be in the league. He doesn't deserve to be scrubbing toilets at an Arby's, frankly. He's a dumbass. Everyone knows this. But the problem here is that Jerry Jones seems to be supporting this guy. There's video of Jerry Jones being interviewed in the locker room following the game. And he, on multiple occasions, a couple times in a row, now, either Jerry Jones is stupid and saw the video and is just stupid and thinks this, or he hadn't saw the video and since then he's probably changed his mind, but a couple times he referred to Greg Hardy as a leader. And that was kind of the company line coming out of the Cowboys locker room, that Greg Hardy was just showing a fire, trying to spark his teammates that were down, trying to fire up the special teams. Of course, the great leader, Greg Hardy. And it was difficult to watch. It was satirical, almost, from Cowboys owner Jerry Jones. And I like Jerry Jones, but let's be honest, he is an old rich man who is playing Madden in real life. He's an old rich man who bought a football team and is playing real-life Madden with them. He's not always going to be my go-to for moral correctness, being politically correct, anything like this. So it's, should I be disappointed in Jerry Jones? Yeah, but I don't much care or much expect anything. Then, NFL Network's Deion Sanders jumps on TV after the game and really starts to defend Greg Hardy. Not after the game. It was actually in the coverage following Sunday Night Football. And he was taking this kind of meathead player's side. You media don't understand. This is something. He was just trying to keep it in the locker room. He didn't owe anything to the media. Because after the game, Greg Hardy went from reporter to reporter. And if you haven't seen the video, he'd say, "Next question," and the person would start to ask the question, he'd cut them off and say, no comment, next question. Went from reporter to reporter like an absolute douchebag, which he is. And it was just a show, and I do trust that Jason Garrett and the coaching staff are pissed off about it, but when you're being undermined by an owner who is paying a lot of money to a defensive end on a team that needs pass rush, Garrett's hands are kind of tied here. And unfortunately, the worst thing that happened is that Greg Hardy played a pretty decent game of football. He got to the quarterback and did what he was supposed to do. So it's a lesson, kids. If you're out there, if you're listening to this podcast, and you're 12, 13, just look at Greg Hardy. Don't focus on being a good person. Just be big, strong, and fast. Trust me. Just know that's a joke. So getting into some other stuff we saw this week, let's focus on football now. Every week I say, this is going to be the last time we rag on the NFL for being horrible. Yada, yada. I still crack up every time I see these football is family commercials from the NFL. It's family, but there's no girls allowed, and don't you dare honor a dead relative or wear socks that aren't the right color because we'll find the shit out of you. But hey, one of the best games of the week, because there was some good football. I swear, there was some very good football this week, actually. And some of them were, a half of great football that made up for a slow start. But the Washington Redskins, Kirk Cousins, probably my favorite post-game clip ever. Him running by the line of report is yelling, "You like that? You like that?" And his voice cracked a little bit in the second one. Kirk Cousins, the football player, I don't know. But Kirk Cousins, the guy, I absolutely love him. He's for him to handle this entire Robert Griffin III situation as well as he has, it's not entirely dissimilar to how Aaron Rodgers had to handle the Brett Favre thing. And now completely different levels, of course, but it's the same level of circus. It's kind of equally ridiculous how the entire thing has gone. Now, Favre and Griffin, no, Favre was good, Robert Griffin's not, but both of them have had to, he and Rodgers have had to kind of replace the golden boy. And it's difficult, but he's handled it perfectly, as well as you'd want someone to. And while I think he's a very flawed quarterback, I mean, he has heart. He's going to carve out that role as a Ryan Fitzpatrick type who just kind of battles around, stays in the league as the 24th best starter in football, that type of thing. He came back into that game, threw for a lot of yards. What did he do? 317, 3 touchdowns, added a rushing touchdown. You'll see him on the stud team later in the show. And that's exciting because there's something going on in Washington, and I'm a fan of it. One thing that's not going on in Washington is Alfred Morris, who, at this point, I am considering dropping in a standard 12-team league, which is bizarre. In that league, I think he might have been my 4th-round pick, and I was happy with that. I thought that the Washington Redskins would just pound the ball this year, and I thought that Alfred Morris, on an expiring contract, would kind of be the guy in the front line who just took bullets. I thought they would run the hell out of him, not re-sign him, and then let him be someone else's problem. Wrong I was. Matt Jones has kind of taken over. Chris Thompson has cut into it. They've been losing a lot, so they can't run. The scheme does not fit Alfred Morris as well as it used to. I think Alfred Morris is, for this season, done. I don't think he's worth a roster spot. A lot of people are going to feel like I do, and they're going to see the draft slot they got Alfred Morris in. I drafted Alfred Morris in the 3rd round, the 4th round. I can't drop the guy. You can't think like that in fantasy football, I don't think. You need to reset your... Excuse me. It just sounded like I was about to cry there. I just got something caught in my throat. I promise you I'm not crying about Alfred Morris. Anyone who's listening to this show, they know I'm very, very emotional about Alfred Morris, one of my favorite players in the league. He's my Frank Gore type. But you need to reset your thinking each and every week. Alfred Morris is no longer your 3rd-round draft pick. He is a person on your team. Probably a bench player, and probably your worst bench player. If you can look to the waiver wire and pick up really anybody else, if you can jump in there and grab an Alfred Blue, like we just talked about, going to be a hell of a lot better than having Alfred Morris on your team, I think. Unless Matt Jones goes down with injury, and that's no sense betting on that. So it's difficult. And I'll be interested to see what happens with him in free agency this year. Another game that more just fascinated me because of my distaste, I guess we'll call it, my distaste for Adrian Peterson. The story that he was labeled questionable. I think he went right to questionable, past probable, with an illness because he swallowed his chewing tobacco and vomited the day before the game or on the day of the game. And outside of a 75-yard run, he was getting bottled up quite a bit. Now, I think that's probably one of the funniest injury stories I've heard. It's right up there with the Grammaticas, I guess. But for Adrian Peters, I mean, this isn't a show to lecture you about lifestyle choices because I've burned both ends of the candle with great vigor, I guess you'd say. But I mean, the chewing tobacco thing, it's just something I've never understood. I mean, if you're smoking, you have something to do with your hand. I mean, there's at least an action to it, even though it's still god-awful and you should never do it, and it's just plain stupid. But you're at least doing something. Tobacco is just like injecting. It's like the heroin smoking. I mean, go for it, Adrian Peterson, but it's just something I cringe at. I'm a very big baseball fan, and you see so many old ball players develop cancer from the chewing tobacco. And there's been a couple just this year, and they've said that's my one regret for my playing career is chewing tobacco. And it's not much in this world makes me say ew. Not much is gross to me, quite frankly. I'm pretty thick-skinned like that, I guess. But chewing tobacco, Adrian Peterson, come on. I think he tried to say it was shrimp or something like that, but that's just as funny, I think. So let's jump into 3 up and 3 down. So we're going to start with 3 up because we need a little positivity here. We need to bring this all together. Let's set our eyes on fantasy football right now and what it means. So 3 up, the Miami Dolphins. Good Lord. Isn't it amazing what happens when you give the football to one of the most talented athletes in the football league? Hey, LaMar Miller, massive day. Massive day. Ryan Tannehill, another big day. And again, I hate this narrative of how much did they hate Joe Philbin. I think Joe Philbin's a great guy. I hope he lands on his feet. But the Dolphins team, I think anyone could have been coaching them. I think they could have had the best coach in the league. I think they just needed a kick in the ass from anyone. Dan Campbell is doing it. Dan Campbell and his 98-inch biceps, he would beat the hell out of any other coach in this league, I believe. Maybe not Rex Ryan. He'd have a knife on him, I think. But the Miami Dolphins, up, and away. And the Oakland Raiders with a big win over the San Diego Chargers. Now, Phillip Rivers and the Chargers crept back into the game. The Chargers also played bad football. Didn't run the ball well at all. But Oakland. And I'm starting to believe in Carr. I've always believed in Cooper. I'm even starting to believe in Crabtree. I mean, I don't feel good saying that. I feel, I almost believe in Crabtree. But Latavius Murray, I'm a huge believer now. I was a bit nervous entering the year because it's one of these things where if he's that good, why is it taken him until now to be the guy, But he looked brilliant, again, extremely talented. And the pieces they have on defense, not the least of which is Charles Woodson, who might be the best man in the NFL right now. If you don't like watching Charles Woodson play football, you do not like football. He is the quintessential defensive football player, I think, in this league. 38 years old. One of my favorite tackling secondary players. Absolutely love it. So also up, St. Louis Rams. We're going to talk about Todd Gurley here in a second, so I'll leave that. But the Rams, defensively, fantastic. They've got the safeties working. That defensive line we know is brilliant. The cornerback's working. That Mark Barron trade is looking good. Real good. Now, Nick Foles is not going to take the team anywhere, period, ever. But they've got the pieces in place to, be a quarterback away. Hopefully they get that quarterback. Now 3 down. We've got the Texans. I don't want to talk about the Texans anymore. Also, the Indianapolis Colts. Andrew Luck hot takes are ruining football this week. I think there's a lot of Andrew Luck hot takes. Is he hurt? Should he sit? I've even heard some people discuss just sitting Andrew Luck for performance. I mean, give me a break. This is This comes down to the GM, how this team is made. Reports after that game that GM Ryan Grigson and the owner, Jim Irsay, got into a heated discussion or altercation of some sort following the game. No wonder, because Jim Irsay is a bit of a lunatic, and Grigson has put together a bad roster. It's a roster with holes, and it's a roster that expects Andrew Luck to carry the rest of it. Even when you look around the league, Andrew Luck's always going to be compared to Peyton Manning, obviously, so look at the Broncos. That team can survive Peyton Manning playing badly, based on talent, based on scheme. Look at the New England Patriots. That team can survive Tom Brady having a bad game. The Packers can survive Aaron Rodgers having a bad game. If Andrew Luck goes out there and he's not at 100%, he's having a bad game, do you think the Colts are going to win? Jesus, no. They don't have the talent. They don't have the fundamental abilities as a team. And they're patched together. That Andre Johnson signing is kind of a representative of the whole thing. I still like the Gore signing, but that Andre Johnson signing, there's plenty of them on the defensive side as well. It's such a strange kind of science experiment of a team, because then you have great moves like Vontae Davis, and then you have Trent Richardson and Andre Johnson, and you wonder what's going on. So that team, it wouldn't expect me, or wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't expect me. It would not surprise me to see the Colts get blown up a little bit if they fail to make the postseason. Thankfully, their division is bad, with a capital B, A, and D. But it's interesting times there. And then the Philadelphia Eagles under Chip Kelly. I don't know if pride is getting in the way in Philadelphia. I'm not sure. It's this Sam Bradford thing. It's not working. Jordan Matthews is not working. Ryan Matthews is working. Hell yeah, Ryan Matthews. Finally, the year I finally gave up on you for my fantasy football teams. You finally break out. And I'm almost happy. I'm glad to see Ryan Matthews happy. That's how much he means to me in fantasy. He's one of those Alfred Morris, Frank Gore types to me. So I'm okay with it. But something is not working with the Eagles, because so much of their game plan focuses on wearing the other team down. Maybe we're going to be losing by 3, 6, 8 going into halftime. But by the time we get into that third quarter, your defense is going to be so worn down from running play after play. You're not going to have the defensive line depth. You are not going to create pass rush. Well, that's not my favorite strategy in the world, because you are saying, okay, we are going to give ourselves the advantage for the second half of the game if everything goes right. Why the hell don't you just try to have the advantage of the whole game? It's a college mentality, and it hasn't worked great this year. It's worked good the last couple of years, 10 wins each year, but different rosters, different talent, and the scheme this year is a little bit different, and I'm not loving it. Maybe Zach Ertz can pick it up, maybe Jordan Matthews can do something. But this week, Jordan Matthews gave me a bit of a helping hand. I own Jordan Matthews in one league, and I decided to sit him in favor of Eric Decker. Thrilled with the choice. I'm loving me some Eric Decker this year. Absolutely loving the guy. Great value pick. In another one of my leagues, heading into the Sunday night game, I was down by 2.4 points, I believe. Or sorry, I was up. I was winning by 2.4, and I was facing Jordan Matthews. So I thought, well, it's been a good week. I'm 3-3 in that league, so I was thinking to myself, this is probably the straw that breaks the camel's back here, and Jordan Matthews went out and put up 14 yards. So, like I always say, winning in fantasy football is just as much to do with blind, backwards luck as it is to making correct decisions. So let's jump into the studs and duds, and then we'll go into some weekly streamers to get you into Week 8. See if we can't salvage that season, or maybe push towards the top spot. QB1 on the stud team, Kirk Cousins. We've talked about him. RB1 on the stud team, LaMar Miller. Now his stat line for that day, 14 carries for 175 and a touchdown, 3 receptions for 61 yards and a touchdown. That was pretty much in one half. He didn't do much in the second half, if anything at all. Absolutely fantastic. he's going to be a high-end RB1 the rest of the way. Then Todd Gurley is my RB2, 19 carries, 128 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then 4 catches for 35 yards. I'm excited as hell by those 4 catches for 35 yards, because if he can add that on every week, that's going to turn 10 into 13 points, 17 into 19 points. These little bumps every week will be huge. I think that Todd Gurley, if he's not already, is the number 1 player in fantasy football. I believe that. If I were to buy a jersey today, it would be a Todd Gurley jersey. I thought it would take a little longer. I was worried that they were going to ease him in, and then the Rams were going to be out of it, so they wanted to save him for 2016. But he's for real. And in my books, if I'm doing a fantasy draft today, I'm drafting Todd Gurley first overall, and I'm not blinking. Wide receiver 1, the strangest week of them all, T.Y. Hilton, 4 catches for 150 and 2 touchdowns on 15 targets. He caught less than a third of his targets, but he blew up when he did get them. So if he can convert on some more of those, lots of that's on Andrew Luck, he's going to explode. And the Colts might be trying to throw their way back into some games. Wide receiver 2, Mike Evans, 8 for 164 and a touchdown. He's back. He's for real. Wide receiver 1 every week. And then Stephon Diggs, wide receiver 3, a streamer that I suggested last week, someone I said had to be universally owned, I think. 6 catches, 108 and a score. He's going to start in Minnesota. If he's not universally owned, he's got to be. And he's someone that I'd probably even start in standard leagues. Tight end 1 is another guy I suggested going into week 7. I think I said to monitor Jordan Reed because Kirk Cousins loves Jordan Reed. He was activated, went for 11 catches, 72 yards, 2 touchdowns. I picked him up as a streamer in a couple of leagues. I think that I might hold on to him and even work him in as a flex the odd time. I think he's got a bye week coming up, but Jordan Reed, if he's healthy, is a borderline top 5 tight end. He's found money. And then the defense of the week on the stud team, the New York Giants. A return touchdown, a touchdown on defense, a few interceptions, more than made up for those 20 points they allowed. Then, unfortunately, the duds, another Giant, Eli Manning for 170. No touchdowns, no interceptions. He had 12.65 points standard scoring in week 6, so it's been a bad run for our boy Eli. That entire offense looks out of sync, except for Orleans, but I'm not adding him in anything. Don't worry. LeGarrette Blount leads the RBs, 3 carries for -3 yards. New England decided not to run the football, and everyone who owned LeGarrette Blount was screwed. That's part of the deal when you own a Patriots runner. RB2 is Melvin Gordon, 7 rushes for 29 yards. Moving into wide receivers, Odell Beckham, 4 for 35. He's had a couple of these this year. I'm still not as high on Odell Beckham as the rest of the world is, but I rest my case because I know people will get angry. Wide receiver 2, Jordan Matthews, 3 for 14. Thank you, buddy. And wide receiver 3, Golden Tate, 2 catches for 14 yards. He's got to produce more, especially with Calvin Johnson and Eric Ebron drawing coverage away. Tight end 1 on the dud team, Julius Thomas, 1 catch, 4 yards. He did not look right. He came out a little bit injured at the end of the game, so there might have been a nagging issue there, but he didn't look good. And then the defense, the dud defense, the Pittsburgh Steelers. They've appeared here a couple of times. Allowed 23 points, picked up a couple sacks, but no impact plays, no fumbles, no interceptions. That Steelers defense is a little scary. So let's look at who you are going to add on waivers this week. If you're looking for a streaming quarterback every single week, I'm going to suggest Ryan Fitzpatrick. I have Sam Bradford in a league, and I'm almost considering a full-time move to Ryan Fitzpatrick. What could happen? What could go wrong? He's facing the Raiders this week. I like that one. Brian Hoyer, even though the Texans are trash, might pick up some garbage against the Tennessee Titans. Marcus Mariota might return on the other side of that game for the Titans. I also wouldn't mind Teddy Bridgewater facing the Chicago Bears. That's a good matchup against that defense. Not strong at all. And then people get sick of my Jay Cutler recommendations, but he's playing the Minnesota Vikings. 3 straight games of 20-plus points. Nobody likes Jay Cutler, but I'll take 20 points on my fantasy team. Looking at running back now, obviously if Darren McFadden is not rostered in your league, he's got to be the top priority. I think he's going to hold on to that top job. Joseph Randle has a bit of an injury, so we'll see how that takes him. Charkandrick West needs to be added. It does seem like he's the guy in Kansas City. There was some question, but he's the guy. Alfred Blue, of course, like we talked about. Duke Johnson of the Cleveland Browns. Now we've got Robert Turbin, Isaiah Crowell in there, but Duke Johnson, if I'm going to own anybody, it's Duke Johnson now. I wasn't high on him earlier in the season, but he's getting used correctly. The way in which he's being used is correct now. And he's got talent if he's put in the right place. I'm still not starting him anything other than a weekly desperation flex. But as his role could grow, I'd rather him be on my roster than not. And then this might be the right time to grab David Cobb, not due back for another week. Tennessee Titans running back who was a big sleeper pick heading into the season. But if you have a roster spot to spare, take a shot in the dark at David Cobb. Wide receiver Stephon Diggs has to be added. Devontae Adams, if he has been dropped by an impatient owner in your league, has to be added. Michael Crabtree is facing the Jets this week. He's going to get a little bit of Darrelle Revis, but I think he's worth rostering anyways. I would roster him and not start him this week. Maybe if you look towards week 9, say, hey, well, I need a receiver in week 9. If so, Crabtree's a good one. Nate Washington will be a hot ad this week. 9 catches for 127 and 2 scores. He's playing the Titans. He's not going to put up those numbers again, but again, if this turns into a shootout, he's going to be a top option in that pass game. And then I think I've had this name a couple weeks now, but Albert Wilson of the Chiefs. They're playing Detroit. He's had 6 targets in back-to-back games. If Jeremy Maclin's back, then he's an absolute dart throw, but if Jeremy Maclin remains out, then Albert Wilson should be on a roster. Looking at tight end, Jordan Reed has to be owned even though he's going into a bye. If you are looking for any tight end help, Jordan Reed is an angel coming down from the heavens to save your team. Even if he's only healthy for another week or two, he's going to give you some excellent, excellent production. Eric Ebron is back in a big way. Now, he doesn't seem to make the plays when they matter, but timing doesn't matter in fantasy football. As long as it happens in the game, it's important. Jump on Eric Ebron. And then if you're really desperate, looking for a deep sleeper or in a deep league, I would look at Kyle Rudolph. He's starting to get some red zone looks again with the Vikings. He's facing a weak Bears defense, back-to-back weeks with a touchdown. Now to the team defenses you're going to be streaming this week. My favorite place to win and sometimes lose a fantasy football week. I will look at the Atlanta Falcons playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because the Falcons are at home. Jameis Winston is still always a risk for interceptions. I'm not sure what Vincent Jackson's health is going to be, so there's going to be opportunity there. I like the Minnesota Vikings playing the Chicago Bears. Yes, I can like Cutler and the Minnesota defense because I do think the Minnesota defense will create some splash plays. Yes, that'll hurt Jake Cutler, but it's going to make Cutler throw his way back into the game again. That's how I see that game unfolding. I also like the Detroit Lions playing against Kansas City because Kansas City doesn't scare me. And then lastly, why not Tennessee versus Houston? A good enough matchup there, and Tennessee has shown the ability to put up a big week. I've got a tough decision to make with my defense. I have the Denver Broncos in 2 of my 3 primary leagues. Am I going to trust the defense, or am I going to be afraid of Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers? A question I am facing. I'm leaning towards finding a streamer. I really am. But I might be brave. I might look death in the face and laugh just a little bit. So I thank you again for listening to the show, to the podcast. It's been episode number 30. Amazing we've come this far. 30 shows, 30 weeks. If you're not already subscribed on iTunes, head over there to iTunes. You can find the link on the backuppunter.com. Subscribe to the Backup Punter Podcast. Give it a rating. Be nice if you like it. If you don't like it, just best to leave things unsaid, I suppose. But I know a lot of you do listen on YouTube, so I would really appreciate if you followed along on iTunes. Also an option to follow along on Stitcher as well, which I know a lot of people use for Android devices. You can follow along on Twitter. Follow me at the Backup Punter. Tweet in your fantasy football questions anytime at all. I'll get right back to you as long as it's not 4 a.m. But tweet in anything, start sit advice, waiver questions, trade advice. I'm always here. Use me as your resource, whether you listen to me or not. Sometimes it's just best to get another opinion on what you're doing with your own roster. So check out the show. Check out the backuppunter.com. There's always a little bit of new content leaking out there. Follow along on Twitter and keep enjoying these podcasts, hopefully as much as I enjoy producing them for you. So this is Keegan Matheson signing off of the 30th episode, the John Kuhn episode. And I hope that all of your punts in life stop on the 1-yard line. Let's talk next week.